Welcome back to another video. We're out here at Staten Island Airfield, kind of on the road to Staten Island Airfield. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that is important if you're considering or you are flying professionally with FPV. Obviously, this is not for all pilots. This is really meant for beginners who have really never dealt with camera setup before. And it is incredibly important. This is something that a lot of people overlook, especially when doing real estate fly-throughs, because this is really important when you're flying indoors. And that is, you need to know how to set your frame rate correctly. And by that, I don't mean set your frame rate correctly so you can get the correct exposure, which is a common issue with shooting with GoPros. I'm really talking about setting your frame rate correctly to match with the lighting. Especially if you're indoors, not in a studio setting, where they will have thought about this and actually set the lights up to be non-flicker, quote unquote. You need to be very aware that when you're flying FPV, there are certain things that will affect your footage very detrimentally. I have an example clip from a fly-through of my parents' house before they moved out. I wasn't really paying attention. I had my son jumping up and down on my legs. So this is really kind of an impromptu, more like, I just want to fly through for the funsies of it just one time. And yeah, I learned very quickly that because I set my 03 air unit, which was my main filming camera, and we're gonna get into why that's a problem, to 100 frames per second, so I'd have low latency mode. But unfortunately, any compact fluorescent light in a space, at least here in the US, is going to have a frequency of 60 hertz. If you don't know where I'm going with this already, seizure warnings ahead. But let's get into the test footage, and you're gonna see why setting your frame rate in the US to 100 frames per second when you're flying near fluorescent lights is a bad thing. It's kind of why, actually, I never really thought about it. Sorry, I'm having a learning moment right now. There's a good chance that the electricity frequency between here and the UK is different, and that's why they use PAL format and we used NTSC. Not 100% sure on that, but I know they generally use 25 frames when we use 24. We use 60 frames, they use 50 frames per second when it came to early, like, high frame rate video. Whether that's the case or not, here in the US, if you set your frame rate to 100 frames per second, as you can see in this test footage, you're gonna get some crazy flicker. And that's because the frame rate, the opening and closing of the shutter on the camera, is basically out of sync with the frame rate of the overhead lighting. It is really distracting. There is, to my knowledge, no way to correct this in post. If you're flying indoors and say you're using the 03 air unit as your primary filming camera, you're gonna run into some issues if you need to fly in low latency mode. Obviously, you can avert this by flying in 60 frames per second mode. You wouldn't get this flicker, and you can use that footage pretty much without cause for alarm. But if, for whatever reason, me personally, it's because I just like flying in low latency mode and I don't want to give that up, you will need to use a secondary camera. That can be something like a GoPro, but if your drone can't take it, obviously you can put on like an Insta360 Go, something like that, where you can control the frame rate independent of your flight latency. This is something that's really an issue with DJI, and something that something that I'm quite frustrated with overall when it comes to the 03 air unit. I wish I could control the frame rate of the internal recording independent of the low latency mode. Like, I wish I could just turn on low latency mode and run it at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second without actually a latency penalty. But this is DJI, we get what we get, and we have to either be happy with it or try flying something different. So that brings us to, what can you do? And the short answer is, if you need to fly in low latency mode, you have to use an additional recording camera. So you need to have an external camera where you can control that frame rate so you don't have to use 100 frames per second on the air unit as your primary footage. The other thing you can do is you can lower your frame rate on your DJI air unit. Obviously, this is gonna make the latency link between your goggles and your flight, your drone, a little bit longer, but it's something you're gonna have to deal with if your only option is to record with that 03 air unit. And let me be clear, if you're flying outdoors and there's no LED lights in your scenes, this is not gonna be an issue at all. You can play back 100 frames per second footage at 60 frames, 30 frames, whatever you need for your timeline. This is really an issue when there's any kind of LED or fluorescent lighting and your frame rate is gonna be at odds with that recording. You'll also see this with car footage. You'll see like the tail lights have like an odd flicker or like a rolling shutter to it. It's something I noticed back in the day with Top Gear, and now that I'm thinking about it, I'd be curious if cars run on that 60 hertz where most of their filming equipment is going to be set default to 50 because they're over there in the UK. Never really thought about that, but I'm kind of now interested if that's the case. All in all, this is not like a crazy big thing, but if you're considering going into flying for real estate, or you already are flying in real estate and you're having this issue, this is how to solve it. It's kind of a dumb issue. If DJI would make it so you could independently control the frame rate of your video recording on the air unit locally and the image that's passed to the transmission system that sends the video to your goggles, it would all be solved. This wouldn't be a worry. You'd be able to set your frame rate for your recording to 60 and then fly in that beautiful, smooth, low latency 100 frames per second mode. But again, we have DJI, they're gonna do what they want, and we're gonna either accept it or find something different. This is something I'm actually curious now about walk snail, because I've never tried flying walk snail before in this kind of manner, using that like pro like filming kit that films in 4K on the air unit itself. I'm kind of curious, because if you could use low latency mode on that camera and get the full 4K 60 or 120 frames per second video, that might be a real good reason to try out walk snail and use walk snail, especially for indoor filming in tight places where you only can realistically carry your flight camera. Something to think about. It's kind of a short video. This is something I ran into, and something that if you're, again, flying professionally, it's something you should learn pretty quick, because it really will be a stumbling block. And also, let me be clear, you do see this in the goggles too. So you do see that flutter. So if you see that flutter in the goggles, you're gonna get it in your footage, and most likely it's gonna be ruined. And there is nothing worse than getting back from a client shoot and looking at your footage and there's something wrong with all of it. Especially something you can't really fix. So with all that said, thank you for joining me. Hopefully you learned something today. If not, hopefully you enjoyed watching me, I guess watching me show you seizure footage. I don't know, I guess, whatever. Hopefully you enjoyed the footage. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thank you all, as always. Comments are appreciated. Hit the like button if you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you want to see another video like this or more videos in the future like this. And yeah, thank you all for joining me. Catch you in the next one. Bye.